Chapter 1 When Magic Ruled the World. My name is William Kamkwamba, and to understand the story I'm about to tell, you must first understand the country that raised me. Malawi is a tiny nation in southeastern Africa. On a map, it appears like a flatworm burrowing its way through Zambia, Mozambique, and Tanzania, looking for a little room. Malawi is often called the warm heart of Africa, which says nothing about its location, but everything about the people who call it home. The Kamkwambas hail from the center of the country, from a tiny village called Masatala, located on the outskirts of the town of Wimbe. You might be wondering what an African village looks like. Well, ours consists of about 10 houses, each one made of mud bricks and painted white. For most of my life, our roofs were made from long grasses that we picked near the swamps, or dambos in our Chikawayan language. The grasses kept us cool in the hot months, but during the cool nights of winter, the frost crept into our bones and we slept under an extra pile of blankets. Every house in Masatala belongs to my large extended family of aunts and uncles and cousins. In our house, there was me, my mother and father, and my 6 sisters, along with some goats and guinea fowl and a few chickens. When people hear I'm the only boy among 6 girls, they often say, Bambo, which is like saying, hey man, or so sorry for you. And it's true. The downside to having only sisters is that I often got bullied in school since I had no older brothers to protect me. And my sisters were always messing with my things, especially my tools and inventions, giving me no privacy. Whenever I asked my parents, why do we have so many girls in the first place, I always got the same answer. Because the baby store was all out of boys. But as you'll see in this story, my sisters are actually pretty great. And when you live on a farm, you need all of the help you can get. My family grew maize, which is another word for white corn. In our language, we lovingly refer to it as chimanga, and growing chimanga required all hands. Every planting season, my sisters and I would wake up before dawn to hoe the weeds, dig our careful rows, then push the seeds gently into the soft soil. When it came time to harvest, we were busy again. Most families in Malawi are farmers. We live our entire lives out in the countryside, far away from cities, where we can tend our fields and raise our animals. Where we live, there are no computers or video games, very few televisions, and for most of my life, we didn't have electricity. Just oil lamps that spewed smoke and coated our lungs with soot. Farmers here have always been poor, and not many can afford an education. Seeing a doctor is also difficult, since most of us don't own cars. From the time we're born, we're given a life with very few options. Because of this poverty and lack of knowledge, Malawians found help wherever we could. Many of us turned to magic, which is how my story begins. You see, before I discovered the miracles of science, I believed that magic ruled the world. Not magician magic, like pulling rabbits out of hats or sawing ladies in half, the sort of thing you see on television. It was an invisible kind of magic, one that surrounded us like the air we breathe. In Malawi, magic came in many forms, the most common being the witch doctor, whom we called Singanga. The wizards were mysterious people. Some appeared in public, usually in the market on Sundays, sitting on blankets spread with bones, spices, and powders that claimed to cure everything from dandruff to cancer. Poor people walked many miles to visit these men since they didn't have money for real doctors. This led to problems, especially if a person was truly sick. Take diarrhea, for example. Diarrhea is a common ailment in the countryside that comes from drinking dirty water, and if left untreated, it can lead to dehydration. Every year, too many children die from something that's easily cured by a regimen of fluids and simple antibiotics. But without money or faith in modern medicine, the villager takes his chances with the Singanga's crude diagnosis. Oh, I know what's wrong, the wizard says. You have a snail. A snail? I'm almost positive. We must remove it at once. The wizard goes into his bag of roots, powders, and bones and pulls out a light bulb. Lift up your shirt, he says. Without plugging the bulb into anything, he moves it slowly across the person's stomach as if to illuminate something only he can detect. There it is! Can you see the snail moving? Oh, yes, I think I can see it. Yeah, there it is. The wizard returns to his bag for some magic potion, which he splashes across the belly. All better? He asks. Yes, I think the snail is gone. I don't feel it moving. Good, that will be 3,000 kwacha. For a little extra money, the Singanga can cast curses on your enemies to deliver floods to their fields, hyenas to their chicken house, or terror and tragedy into their homes. This is what happened to me when I was 6 years old, or at least I thought it did. I was playing in front of my house when a group of boys walking past carrying a giant sack. They worked for a nearby farmer tending his cows. That morning, as they were moving the herd from one pasture to another, they discovered the sack lying on the road. Looking inside, they saw that it was filled with bubble gum. Can you imagine such a treasure? I can't begin to tell you how much I loved bubble gum. Now, as they walked past, one of them spotted me playing in a puddle. Should we give them to this boy? He asked. I didn't move or say a word. A bit of mud dripped from my hair. Why not, his friend said. He looks kind of pathetic. The boy reached into his bag and produced a rainbow of gumballs, one of every color, and dropped them into my hands. By the time the boys disappeared, I'd shoved every one into my mouth. The sweet juices dribbled down my chin and stained my shirt. Little did I know, but the bubble gum belonged to a local trader who stopped by our house the next day. He told my father how the bag had dropped from his bicycle as he was leaving the market. By the time he circled back to look for it, the bag was gone. The people in the next village told him about the herd of boys. Now he wanted revenge. I've gone to see the Singanga, he told my father, and whoever ate that bubble gum will be sorry. Suddenly I was terrified. I'd heard what the Singanga could do to a person. In addition to delivering death and disease, the wizards controlled armies of witches who could kidnap me during the night and shrink me into a worm. I'd even heard about them turning children into stones, leaving them to suffer an eternity in silence. Already I could feel the Singanga watching me, plotting his evil. With my heart racing, I ran into the forest behind my house to try to escape, but it was no use. I felt the strange warmth of his magic eyes shining through the trees. He had me. At any moment, I would emerge from the forest as a beetle or a trembling mouse to be eaten by the hawks. Knowing my time was short, I hurried home to where my father was plucking a pile of maize and tumbled into his lap. It was me, I shouted, tears running down my cheeks. I ate the stolen gum. I don't want to die, Papa. Please don't let them take me. My father looked at me for a second and shook his head. It was you, huh? He said, then kind of smiled. Didn't he realize I was in trouble? Well, he said, and his knees popped as he rose from his chair. My father was a big man. Don't worry, William. I'll find the traitor and explain. I'm sure we can work something out. That afternoon, my father walked 5 miles to the trader's house and told him what had happened. And even though I'd only eaten a few of the gumballs, he paid the man for the entire bag, which was nearly all the money we possessed. That evening after supper, my life having been saved, I asked my father if he truly believed I was in trouble. He became very serious. Oh yes, we were just in time, he said, then started laughing so hard his chair began to squeak. William, who knows what was in store for you? My fear of wizards and magic only grew worse whenever Grandpa told stories. If you saw my grandpa, you might think that he was kind of a wizard himself. He was so old that he couldn't remember the year he'd been born. So cracked and wrinkled that his hands and feet looked as if they were chiseled from stone. And his clothes! Grandpa insisted on wearing the same tattered coat and trousers every day. Whenever he emerged from the forest, puffing on his hand-rolled cigar, you'd think one of the trees had grown legs and started walking. It was Grandpa who told me the greatest story about magic I'd ever heard. Long ago, before the giant maize and tobacco farms came along and cleared away our great forests, when a person could lose track of the sun inside the trees, the land was rich with antelope, zebra, and wildebeest. Also, lions, hippos, and leopards. Grandpa was a famous hunter, so good with his bow and arrow that it became his duty to protect his village and provide its meat. One day, while Grandpa was out hunting, he came across a man who'd been killed by a poisonous pit viper. He alerted the nearest village, and soon after they returned with their witch doctor. The Singanga took one look at the dead man, then reached into his bag and tossed some medicines into the trees. Seconds later, the earth began to move as hundreds of vipers slithered out of the shadows and gathered around the corpse, hypnotized by the spell. The wizard then stood on the dead man's chest and drank a cup of potion, which seemed to flow through his feet and into the lifeless body. Then, to Grandpa's amazement, the dead man's fingers began to move and he sat up. Together, he and the wizard inspected the fangs of each snake, looking for the one that had bitten him. "Believe it," Grandpa told me. "I saw this with my own eyes." I certainly believed it, along with every other story about witches and things unexplained. Whenever I went down the dark trails alone, my imagination spun wild. What scared me the most were the Gule Wamkulu, the magical dancers that lived in the murky shadows of the forest. They sometimes appeared in the daylight, performing in tribal ceremonies when we Chua boys became men. They were not real people, we were told, but spirits of our dead ancestors sent to roam the earth. Their appearance was ghastly. Each had the face and skin of animals, and some walked on stilts to appear taller. Once I saw one scurry backward up a pole like a spider, and when they danced, it was as if 1,000 men were inside their bodies, each moving in the opposite direction. When the Gule Wamkulu weren't performing, they traveled the forest and dambos looking for young boys to take back to the graveyards. What happened to you there, I never wanted to know. Whenever I saw one, even at a ceremony, I dropped everything and ran. Once, when I was very young, a magic dancer suddenly appeared in our courtyard. His head was wrapped in a flour sack, but underneath was the long nose of an elephant and a gaping hole for a mouth. My mother and father were in the field, so my sisters and I ran for the bush where we watched the dancers snatch our favorite chicken. Unlike the Gule Wamkulu or the Singanga in the market, most witches and wizards never revealed their identity. In the places where they practiced their magic, mystery abounded like strange weather. In the nearby town of Nichisi, men with bald heads standing as tall as trees walked the roads at night. Ghost trucks traveled back and forth, approaching fast with their headlights flashing and engines revving loud. Yet, when the lights finally passed, there was no truck attached. In one of the neighboring villages, I heard about a man who'd been shrunk so small by a wizard that his wife kept him in a Coke bottle. In addition to casting spells for curses, the Singanga often battled one another. At night, they piled aboard their planes and prowled the skies looking for children to kidnap as soldiers. The witch planes could be anything, a wooden bowl, a broom, a simple hat, and each was capable of traveling great distance. Malwai to New York, for example, in a single minute. Children were used as guinea pigs and sent to test the powers of rival wizards. Other nights, they visit camps of other witch children for games of mystical soccer, where the balls were human heads stolen from people as they slept. Lying in bed at night, I would become so frightened thinking about these things that I'd cry out for my father. "Papa!" I'd shout, summoning him to my door. "I can't sleep. I'm afraid." My father had no place for magic in his life. To me, this made him seem even stronger. As a devout Presbyterian, he believed that God, not juju, was his best protection. "Respect the wizards," he would tell me, straightening my bed covers. "But remember, William, with God on your side, they have no power against you." I trusted my father, but as I got older, I began to wonder how his explanation accounted for Chuck Norris, Terminator, and Rambo, who arrived at the Wimbay Trading Center one summer and caused all kinds of ruckus. These men appeared in action movies that played in the local video show, which was really just a mud hut with benches, a television, and a VCR. At night, wonderful and mysterious things happened there, but since I wasn't allowed out after dark, I never saw any of them. Instead, I had to hear stories the next morning from friends whose parents weren't so strict. "Last night, I watched the best of all movies," said my friend Peter. "Rambo jumped from the top of the mountain and was still firing his gun when he landed at the bottom. Everyone in front of him died and the entire mountain exploded." He pretended to clutch a machine gun and fire in all directions. "When will they start showing these films during the day?" I said. "I never get to see anything." The night the Terminator came to the video show, it was simply shocking. When Peter found me the next morning, he was still in a state. William, I just don't understand this movie. This man was shot left, right, and center, and yet he still managed to live. I'm telling you, this Terminator must be the greatest wizard ever. It sounded fantastic. Do you think the Americans have such magic? I asked. I don't believe it. This is what I saw, Peter said. I'm telling you, it's true. Although years would pass before I saw any of these films, they began influencing our games at home. One was a shooting game that I played with my cousin Jeffrey, using toy guns we made from a mapoloni bush. Finding a straight branch, we removed its core, like taking out the insides of a ballpoint pen, and used it as a ramrod to fire paper spitballs. I was the captain of one team, and Jeffrey was the captain of the other. Along with our cousins, we formed squads and hunted one another between the houses in our village. You go left and I'll go right, I instructed my soldiers one afternoon, then crawled on hands and knees through the red dirt. My poor mother was constantly scrubbing our clothes. Right away, I spotted Jeffrey's trousers from around the corner of the house. Slowly, without spooking the chickens, I snuck up behind for an easy ambush. Tonga! I shouted, then jammed the ramrod, sending a shower of slime into his face. He clutched his heart and fell to the ground. My Ine, he gasped. You got me. We were a solid gang of 3, me, Jeffrey, and our friend Gilbert. Gilbert's father was the chief of our whole Wimbe district, a man whom everyone called Chief Wimbe, even though his real name was Albert. When Jeffrey and I got bored with playing our games in the courtyard, we often headed to Gilbert's. Let's see how many chickens we can count, I said, taking off down the path. Going over to Gilbert's house was always fun, since the chief's work was never finished. As usual, we found a long line of truck drivers, farmers, traders, and market women all waiting to voice their concerns. As we suspected, many of them carried a chicken under their arm, a gift for their chief. I counted 10, Jeffrey whispered. Yeah, I said. Must be lots of problems today. The chief's messenger and bodyguard, Mr. Ngawata, stood at the door in his short pants and army boots, dressed as a police officer. It was Mr. Ngawata's job to protect the chief and filter all of his visitors. He was also the chicken collector. Come, he said, and motioned us inside. The chief sat on the sofa in the living room, dressed in a crisp shirt and nice trousers. Chiefs usually dress like business people, never in feathers and animal skins. That's in the movies. Another thing about Chief Wimbe was that he loved his cat, which was black and white but had no name. In Malwai, only dogs are given names. I don't know why. We found Gilbert in his room singing to the radio. Gilbert had the most beautiful voice and dreamed of becoming a famous singer. My voice sounded like one of the guinea fowl that screeched in our trees as it pooped, but I never let that stop me from singing. Gilbert, bow! Bow? Sharp? Sharp! That was our slang we used every time we saw one another. The word beau was short for bonjour, started by some chaps who were learning French in school and wanting to show off. It means hello in that language. I don't know where sharp came from, but it was like saying, are you cool? And if we were feeling really good, we went a bit further. Sure? Sure. Fit? Fit. Eh. Let's go to the trading center, I said. I bet there's a mountain of treasures outside Ofezi. Ofezi Boozing Center was the local bar in Wimbe. Its most popular drink was Shake Shake, a kind of beer made from corn that was sold in cardboard cartons. I wasn't allowed inside. Ofezi, but I'm guessing they didn't have a garbage can because every night the men tossed their empty cartons into the road. Gilbert, Jeffrey, and I liked to collect them. After we washed the cartons out with water, they made the perfect toy trucks. Even though we lived in a small village in Africa, we did many of the same things kids do all over the world. We just used different materials. After talking with friends I met in America, I know this is true. Children everywhere have similar ways of playing with one another, and if you look at it this way, the world isn't such a big place. My friends and I loved trucks. It didn't matter what kind. We loved the 4-ton dump trucks that rumbled out of the big farms kicking up dust. We loved the small pickups that took passengers from Wimbe to Kasungu, the nearest city. We loved them all, and each week we'd compete to see who could build the best one. I know that in America you can buy toy trucks already assembled in a store. In Malwai, we built ours from Shake Shake cartons and pieces of wire. To us, they were just as beautiful. The axles were sections of wire we bought by picking mangoes. And for the wheels, we used bottle caps. Even better were the plastic caps from our mother's containers of cooking oil, which lasted much longer. And if we took our father's razor blades, we could cut designs in the wheels to give each truck its own unique treading. That way, the tracks in the dirt told us if the truck belonged to Kamkawamba Toyota, for instance, or to Gilbert Company Ltd. We also built our own monster wagons called chigiriri that looked like American go-karts. We made the frames from thick tree branches, careful to find ones with giant knots or a fork that could be used as a seat. We then dug up larger tuber roots called kambu that looked like mutant sweet potatoes and shaped them into wheels. The axles were poles carved from a blue gum tree. After everything was assembled, we tied it all together with vines and hoped it didn't fall apart. To make the car move, one person pulled with a long rope while the driver steered with his feet. With two cars side by side, we held derbies through the trading center. Let's race! For sure! Last one to reach the barber shop will go blind! Go! After the race, if we had some money in our pockets, we'd stop by Mr. Banda's shop for a cold bottle of Fanta and some dandy sweets. Mr. Banda ran the Malawian version of a convenience store. On his shelves were packages of margarine and powdered milk, since most people didn't have refrigerators at home to keep milk cold. He also sold aspirin, cough drops, lotions, bars of Lifebuoy soap, and on the very bottom shelf, Drew's liver salts. I have no idea what liver salts were used for, but I'm certain they tasted rotten. Whenever we entered, Mr. Banda greeted us in our usual Malawian custom. Muli Bawanji, he said. How are you? Nadiri bueno, kaya inu, we answered. I'm fine, how about you? Nadiri bueno, zikomo. I'm fine, thanks for asking. After that, it was more of the same stuff. You boys keeping out of trouble? Yeah. Helping your mother and father at home? Yeah. Well, give them my greetings. For sure. If we were really hungry, we combined our money and headed to the Kayanaka stand, which was like a Malawian fast food restaurant. It was really just a vat of boiling grease over a fire, but the fried goat meat and potatoes they served were heavenly. The man tending the fire would grunt and say, "How much?" And we would answer, 5 kwacha, or however much money we had. 5 kwacha was less than $1 American. The man then turned around and cut a few chunks of meat from a goat hanging from a rail. He dropped the meat into the boiling oil, followed by a handful of sliced potatoes. When everything floated to the top, he served it on a wooden counter along with a pile of salt for dipping. Your mother's a good cook, Gilbert told me once, but not as good as this. Yeah. My parents wanted me home before dark, but that was my favorite time of day anyway. It was when my father and Uncle John, Jeffrey's father, finished their work in the maize fields and came home for supper. In the kitchen, my older sister Annie helped my mother prepare the food. Since we had no electricity, we still cooked everything over a fire. As Annie fed sticks into the flames, my mother stirred a pot of something delicious, letting the smells escape into the courtyard. Since I was a growing boy, it was hard for me to wait, even if I'd just eaten cayenne in the trading center. With my stomach growling, I'd stand in the doorway begging. Just a few more minutes, my mother would say. By the time you wash your hands and face, it will be ready. Usually before supper, my cousins gathered in the courtyard and played soccer. Since we had no money for a real ball, we made our own using plastic shopping bags that we called jumbos, wadded together and tied with rope. They didn't have the same kind of bounce as a real soccer ball, but they still allowed us to play. All across Africa, children used the same jumbo balls. If it was the rainy season, when the mangoes were ripe, we filled our pails from the neighbors' trees and ate them for dessert. We bit into the juicy fruit and let the sweet syrup run down our fingers. If there wasn't any moonlight for playing soccer, my father gathered all the children, cousins and all, in the living room, lit a kerosene lamp, and told us folk tales. Be still and hush up, he would say. Now, have I told you the story about the leopard and the lion? Tell it again, Papa. Sometimes my father forgot the stories and made up new ones as he went along, creating new characters and outrageous endings. And while we loved hearing these tales, the truth was that real life was sometimes difficult to distinguish from fantasy. During the times of year when we planted and harvested our maize, 2 jobs that required lots of work, my father and Uncle John hired someone to help them. The most famous of these workers was Mr. Fury, a man of incredible power. In fact, whenever John and my father needed to clear a new field for planting, They didn't even bother with tractors. Instead, they sent Fury, who yanked entire trees out of the ground as if they were weeds. Everyone knew that Fury's secret was Megalomera, a kind of magic that delivered superhuman strength. Only the strongest wizards in Malwai could give you this potion, which came in a paste made from the bones of leopards and lions. To get the strength, the wizard cut your skin with special razor blades and rubbed the medicine into your blood. Once part of you, it never left. In fact, the magic only became stronger with time. Only the toughest men like Fury could live with it inside them. Fury was so strong that no person or animal could beat him. Once while working in the fields, a deadly black mamba slithered over his foot and prepared to strike. But Fury wasn't afraid. He reached down and whipped the mamba with a blade of grass, leaving it paralyzed. Then he grabbed it by the head and tossed it all the way to Mozambique. People said he carried another mamba in his pocket for good luck, and that snake was too afraid to bite him. By the time I was 8 or 9 years old, the thought of Megalomera seemed more and more attractive. You see, I was very small, and this led to constant trouble with bullies at school. The worst was named Limbikani, who was tall and muscular and had older brothers at home, which made him even more ruthless. For some reason, Limbikani liked to pick on me and Gilbert. One day, on our way to school, he waited for us on the road and jumped out from a grove of trees. "Oh, look, it's William and his friend Little Chief Wimbe." "Leave us alone," I shouted, but my voice cracked and gave me away. Limbikani put his chest in Gilbert's face. "Where's the big chief, monkey boy? Looks like he's not here to protect you." He grabbed the backs of our shirts and dangled us in the air like two sad puppies. Then he stole our lunch. This happened again and again. Not only did my size leave me defenseless against bullies, it also haunted me on the soccer field. I loved soccer more than anything, and each week I glued myself to Radio 1 for Malwai Super League action. My favorite team was the Nomads, whose star player was Bob the Savior Mitingajira. The Savior got his nickname from one Christmas Eve when he saved us from defeat against the Big Bullets, and I can't tell you how much I hate the Big Bullets. Despite my size, I longed to be a player as worthy as my heroes. Whenever all of us boys gathered for practice and drills, I was some kind of star, in my own mind. Oh, how I would shine, zigzagging between defenders and firing the ball at missile speed. Then, one day, I was displaying my various skills when Jeffrey and some others called out to me, "Hey, Cara, give us the ball." Cara, as in Peter Cara. Despite my love for the Nomads, my greatest hero in all the universe was indeed Peter Cara, the best player for the Flames, our national team, and to me, a man even greater than the president. To be called Cara was no small thing. I couldn't stop smiling. Soon, everyone on the practice pitch was calling me Cara. Even when I went to the training center, I was greeted with shouts and praise. "Hey, Cara, I heard you play like a lion." But when it was time to pick the teams for competition, the captains somehow skipped over me. Thinking this was a serious mistake on their part, I pointed it out, only to be told to sit on the bench. How could this be? Well, I thought, the captains are clever fellows. Perhaps they're saving me from injury, keeping me as a secret weapon for the finals. This made me feel even more special. But while I sat on the sidelines, the other players ran past me and yelled, "Keep the bench warm, Cara, or Cara will be needing you soon, as the bolela." A bolela was a ball fetcher. That's when I realized it had all been a joke. I was called Cara, not because of my ferocious skills, but because I was a lousy player. The following summer, I decided to do something about it. Mr. Fury had a nephew named Shivani who was always bragging about being a real Singanga who possessed Megalomera. Gilbert and I suspected he was full of hot air, but we were never sure. Shivani was small like me, yet he boasted like a man 3 times his size. This made us wonder. Shivani didn't go to school but worked all day in the fields with his uncle. So he was usually there when I returned home in the afternoons complaining about bullies or sitting on the bench. One day, after hearing another one of my pathetic stories, he pulled me aside. "Every day you're moaning about these boys, and I'm tired of hearing it," he said. "I can give you Megalomera. You can become the strongest guy in school. All of the bullies will fear you." Of course, having superpowers was a lifelong dream. On the soccer field, I could fly like a leopard with legs like rocket launchers. Pow! Reacting to my Mangalomera, bullies at school would wet their trousers with fright. My father had always warned me about playing with magic. But now, with Shivani standing there smiling like a mongoose, I couldn't resist. Okay, I blurted. I'll take it. We'll do it in the blue gum forest, he said. Meet me there in 1 hour and bring 20 tambala. A tambala was like a penny in our Malwayan money. An hour later, I arrived in the forest and waited in the shadows for Shivani, my heart beating fast. Shivani then appeared through the trees carrying a black bag that contained something heavy. Are you ready? He asked. Yeah, I'm ready. Then sit down. We took a seat on the soft red dirt and he opened his bag of wonders. From inside, he pulled out a tiny matchbox. In here are the blackened bones of lions and leopards, along with other roots and herbs. He fished out another package filled with strange dust, which he mixed with the ashes. These other materials are extremely rare, found only on the bottom of the ocean. So how did you get them? I asked. Look, boy, he snapped. I'm not some ordinary person. I got them from the bottom of the ocean. I stayed down there for 3 whole days. If I wanted to, I could turn every person in your stupid village into an ant. So don't play with me, Bombo. If you want this kind of power, it will cost you lots of money. What I'm giving you is only a small taste. I didn't even see him pull out his magic razor. Before I knew it, he grabbed my hand and cut into my knuckles. Ah! I screamed. Be still and don't cry, he said. If you cry, it won't work. I'm not crying. My knuckles brightened with blood. For each one, Shivani pinched a little powder and rubbed it into the cuts. The medicine stung like 100 bees. Once he finished both hands, I exhaled with relief. See? I didn't cry, I said, panting. I've been holding my breath. Do you think it will work? Oh yeah, it will work. When? I asked. When will I have my power? He thought for a few seconds and said, Give it 3 days to work its way through your veins. Once it's complete, you'll feel it. 3 days. Yeah, and whatever you do, don't eat okra and stay away from sweet potato leaves. I'll remember. And lastly, he added, Tell no one. I walked out of the forest rubbing my mangled knuckles. Although they hurt like mad, I had to admit they looked pretty tough. That evening, I hid in my room and spoke to no one. 3 days was a long time to wait, but it worked with my plan. It was the beginning of the summer holiday, and the following morning I left to visit my grandparents, who lived a few hours away in the town of Doha. It was the perfect place to receive my powers before coming home a hero. Well, 3 days crept by so slowly I thought I would die from boredom. Worse, my grandmother kept putting me to work cleaning the yard and chicken pens and scrubbing her kitchen floor, which left my arms tired and rubbery. Oh, I wondered, when will I become strong? But on the 4th day I awoke and instantly felt different. My arms were heavy as if laden with stones. I flexed my muscles and they felt as firm as tree trunks. My hands squeezed into fists were as solid as 2 bricks. Heading outside, I took off running down the dirt road to test my speed. Sure enough, I felt the wind in my face like never before. That afternoon, my Uncle Mata invited me to watch a soccer game at the town field. Perfect, I thought. Here I can test my powers. Like always, the place was packed with people. But I had no interest in the game. Instead, I scanned the crowd looking for the biggest boy. When I found him, around my age, standing on the far corner of the field, I walked over and stomped on his bare foot. He let out a cry. Excuse me, he said, hopping up and down. You just stepped on my toes. I stared at him, saying nothing. I said you stepped on my toes. It hurt. So what? I said. Well, it's rude, don't you think? Then why don't you do something about it? He looked confused. What do you mean? You heard me. Do something, Cape. Cape is a drooling idiot. Well, in that case, he said, I'm going to beat you. That's what I was hoping you would say. We began dancing around in circles, and I wasted no time. I unleashed a flurry of punches that were so fast and terrifying that my arms blurred before my eyes. I gave him lefts and rights and a few uppercuts for good measure. My iron fists moved so furiously that I didn't even feel them smashing his face. After a while, though, I began to feel sorry for the guy, so I backed away and took a breath. But to my surprise, the boy was still standing. Worse, he was laughing at me. Before I could unleash another deadly round, I felt a terrible pain in my eye, then another and another. Soon I was lying on the ground while his fist pounded my back and stomach. By the time my uncle raced over and rescued me, I was crying and covered with dust. "What are you doing, William?" he shouted. "You know better than to fight. That boy is twice your size." I was so embarrassed that I ran back to my grandparents' house and didn't come outside for the rest of the weekend. Once I got home, I found Shivani and confronted him. "Your magic doesn't work. You promised me power, but I was beaten in Doha." "Of course it works," he said, then thought for a second. "Listen, did you take a bath the day I gave it to you?" "Yes." "Well, that's why. My medicine doesn't allow you to bathe." "You never said that." "Of course I did." But, as you can see, I was clearly cheated. My first and only experience with magic left me with sore hands, a throbbing eye, and a healthy dose of skepticism. Gradually, the witches and wizards didn't seem as frightening or powerful, and I began to look at the world in a different way. I saw it as one explained by fact and reason rather than mystery and hocus pocus. But in this world, there still existed the same set of sorrows.